Presenting JMAA, Japura Masters Alumni Association.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I warmly welcome all our viewers to the first webinar of the Masters Mindset webinar series organized by the Japura Masters Alumni Association, also known as the JMAA, powered by Elearning.lk. I'm Wijewardana, your host for today. So let me start by telling a little bit about the University of Sri Wijewardana. So University of Sri Wijewardana, with an iconic history of over 145 years, is the second oldest university in Sri Lanka. With 8 faculties in operation, it is the home for over thousands of undergraduates and postgraduate students. The institution possesses a large and diversified academic portfolio, which accommodates best knowledge sharing practices, thereby emphasizing on social harmony and equal opportunity. It has also strengthened the bonds with the industry over the past years to nurture the value of education. In that light, I would like to introduce our guest featuring today. He is none other than Dr. W.A. Wijewardana. He is a well-known economist, the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, member, Board of Studies of Faculty of Graduate Studies of the University of Sri Wijewardana, and also a member of the Board of Studies, Postgraduate Institute of Management. I believe everyone knows it at PIM. And he's also the president of Business Management School, the BMS. And he's also a renowned scholar, a columnist in Daily FT, and also a visiting lecturer. I warmly welcome you, sir. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much, Rukshani, for having me.
So without further ado, I would like to kickstart the webinar. So my first question to you is about Sri Lanka's economy. So everyone says that the Sri Lanka's economy in dire state. How can you explain this situation? Is it true that it is in a dire state?
Well, Rukshani, when an economy is in crisis, that factor cannot be hidden by the members of the public. It is the members of the public who actually feel it, that they are experiencing a very difficult situation. Now, today, if you look at the people in Sri Lanka, you'll find they are more in queues rather than in workplaces. They are all clamoring for reduction in prices. They actually shout at the difficult economic conditions they are facing. And at the same time, you'll be noticing that the banking sector, the business sector, and small entrepreneurs, all these people are complaining that they cannot continue with their production activities as a result of the shortage of the essential inputs for their factories. So as a result, we don't have to, make it public that Sri Lanka's economy is in a dire state, because it is being felt by everybody around us, including us, Rukshani.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the main things we see is actually that the dollar fluctuation. But before that, I'll just ask you this question. So in the past months, the central bank claimed that the US dollar was at 202, but it was impossible to find foreign exchange at banks. Yeah. And however, if we reach out to the black market, there was no issue in finding these unfound dollars at a much higher rate. So how did this happen? And did we foresee this happening as well?
Well, Shari, this had been foreseen for many years. I mean, not necessarily since the appointment of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa as president in November 2019, the decline in the foreign sector of Sri Lanka had been witnessed by people like us from around year 2010. Because what had actually happened, Rukshan, is that Sri Lanka had been depending on international trade for many millennia. I mean, if you go back to say 3,000 years ago, you will find there is evidence that Sri Lanka had got its prosperity, wealth creation and income not from the production base inside the country, but by getting engaged in international trade. But what happened was after 2005, the government had adopted a new economic strategy known as the domestic economy-based economic strategy, which means that you will promote the domestic economy, meet its requirements, and then you think that you are a very happy nation. So as a result, the exports did not get the due recognition which it deserves from the policymakers. And in year 2000, Rukshani, the total exports of the country was about, say, 1/3 of the total GDP. But in 2005, it fell to 26%. 2010, it fell to 15%. Now it is around, say, 11 to 12%. So what it means is when you don't earn enough foreign exchange, and if your foreign exchange payment bill is so high, you always run into a gap. And the gap was financed by Sri Lanka, not by earning foreign exchange, but by borrowing from outside. Therefore, it actually gave rise to an unwanted issue in Sri Lanka today, which we call the debt trap. And at the same time, when the foreign debt could not be contracted anymore, because the international sovereign bond market was cut for Sri Lanka due to two reasons. Reason number one is that the government did not have a proper policy plan. Second one is our rating agencies actually downgraded Sri Lanka significantly from B- to around CCC level. So as a result, the entire sovereign bond market was closed for Sri Lanka. So we could not borrow anymore. Then what we did, Rukshani, was we were simply using the existing reserves, which amounted to about 7.6 billion at the end of 2019. And after we had used it up, and it came down to a very low level now. And if you look at the latest figures published by the central bank says that the foreign reserves are around, say, 2.3 billion, which is actually a very smart accounting manipulation. Because central bank had added a soft facility which it had got from the People's Bank of China in yuan as a part of Sri Lanka's foreign reserves, even though those yuan are not available for Sri Lanka to make general payments. So if we take out the yuan component and the gold component and also our position with the International Monetary Fund, the available usable foreign exchange reserve as at the end of February 2022 had come down to some $400 million, which was sufficient to meet the import requirements of less than 1 week. So what happened, Rukshani, was that in the middle of, by the first week of March, the central bank could not hold on to this particular artificial exchange rate of 203 rupees per US dollar, and it had to allow the rupee to have a free fall. But the black market, what happens is, now when the central bank had maintained this artificial rate for so long, about say 2 years, and when dollars are not available, as you have very correctly pointed out, in the formal banking sector at that rate, those who needed dollars had to visit the black market. Black market was freely exchanging this. They are getting dollars at a high rate and they are selling dollars at a high rate. And what matters to us here is that the existence of a black market is the worst enemy of a central bank. Because if the central bank is, thinking of introducing its policies effectively, the first thing it has to do is to eliminate the black market. The black market, whether it is in the goods sector or the financial sector or the dollar sector, it doesn't matter. Black markets are the worst enemies. So what happened was there was a free fall in the first week of March. And then what happened was that even at the rate which the central bank had decided as the cap at 230, there were no dollars available. So it had to allow the rupee to have a free fall. It fell to 245, 55, 65, 85, 75, 95, and today it is around, say, 289. But what is happening is here, since we had not tackled the issue of the black market, which I will discuss later, the central bank has to now chase after black market. Now it is chasing. It's actually an unsuccessful chasing by the central bank. And what it should do is it has to first take effective measures to eliminate the black market by having an exchange rate which should be above the rate that is available at the black market, and then allow the investors and migrant workers to send the money through the normal official channels. But since no action has been taken in that regard, black market price is rising daily and central bank is chasing after it. So we are now in a very unsuccessful and elusive chase behind some fellow who is running faster than us.
Definitely, definitely. So you also mentioned about the homegrown policy about it, right? So what happened to it? That was the plan, bringing in before the floating of the rupee. What happened to it?
Well, Rukshani, when somebody says, that he has a homegrown policy, you have to actually immediately suspect the meaning of that homegrown policy as well as the motive of that policy. In economics, Rukshani, there are no homegrown policies. In economics, we have economic policies, and those economic policies are universal, and they will be applied to any country, whether it's a developed country or a poor country. It doesn't matter, because the human beings are same whether they are in a developed country or in a poor country. So economic policies are universal. When somebody says, I have a homegrown policy, what it actually means is he's trying to satisfy the internal desire of some people who love the homegrown things. Now, for example, we find in people in Sri Lanka who actually who love that they have cultivated their own vegetables, they have cultivated their own rice, they have cooked their own meals at home, because they don't realize the fact that when an economy becomes a complex body, all of us become very specialized in a particular activity. So as a result, we become specialists in our own activity, but when it comes to satisfying all our needs, we have to depend on other people. For example, Rukshani, imagine a situation where I produce my own teledramas, I sing my own songs, and I cut my hair by myself, and I cultivate my own vegetables, and I cultivate my paddy in my own home garden. Then what would happen to thousands of other people who are engaged in that? By becoming a specialist and by buying these things from the market, Rukshani, what I have done is I have given livelihood to many thousands of fellow Sri Lankans and many thousands of people outside Sri Lanka, because as I said, this is a universal thing. And I am actually maintaining many families. When I buy a kilogram of rice from the market, I have actually provided funding to a unknown fellow in Galimbidunuwava who had produced that rice for us. So that is the situation. So when it comes to this homegrown things cannot operate in a complex market. They can operate, in a place where, people are living in a cave. Now imagine that, we have gone back to a cave, and in that cave, we'll have to produce our own fire. We have to produce acquire our own meat, and we have to hunt, we have to gather our own grains, and we do it by ourselves. Because these people are simply, people who are just eating and not doing anything. But today, we are having webinars, we produce movies, we are engaged in ICT, and you are engaged in a different trade. So therefore, in a complex economy like today, where we don't live in a cave anymore, if somebody says that, he has an homegrown policy, I immediately suspect that motive as well as the content of that homegrown policy.
Understood. So, sir, these making the floating the rupee was the only answer in the current situation?
Well, there is no any other choice, because as I told you, if you want to keep the dollar at 203 rupees per US dollar, Rukshani, you must be prepared to supply to the market an unlimited quantity of dollars when there is a demand for that. But when the central bank's foreign reserve position had fallen to a 400 million US dollars, and also it has other commitments to meet, it could not supply dollars anymore. And as a result, you have to allow the market to take charge of the entire situation. So that is why the bank had to allow a free fall of the Sri Lanka rupee by the first week of March. But the way that it had done is completely erroneous, wrong way, because it had not been done by them by choice, but they had been forced to do it by circumstances. Therefore, we are now in this, eternal race with the black market to chase after it, but we cannot catch the guy and, stop the black market. I will give you an example, Rukshani, if you permit me.
Yes,
how we did it in year 2001 when Governor was Wijewardana in the central bank. I was the deputy governor at that time. We were facing a similar situation as today in year 2000 also, because our foreign reserves had fallen drastically from 2 billion to 1 billion, and we were not able to maintain the exchange rate at the rate that had been fixed by the central bank. So as a result, we had to allow the rupee to fall, which we call free floating. But Governor Wijewardana planned it meticulously, because the first thing he did was he increased the central bank's lending rate from 16% to 25%, a huge increase. And now that lending rate called the bank rate at that time, but today you call it the central bank static lending rate, which has been fixed at 7.5% by the present central bank. The reason why you have increased the central bank lending rate to that level is to allow the interest rates in the market to go up, so that anybody who wants to keep the dollars outside Sri Lanka with the objective of bringing it back after the dollar rupee had fallen, there is no incentive for him to do that, because he has to incur a higher rupee cost here in Sri Lanka, because he has to borrow at a higher interest rate. Now today, everybody has an incentive to keep the dollars out, because they can borrow from the market at say 9 to 10%. And if the rupee depreciates more than 10%, they are making a good profit. So you have to remove that particular incentive for the speculators to operate. Second one is, when you allow a vehicle to go down a cliff, there must be somebody who will have to, apply the brakes and also hold the vehicle. And for example, suppose the vehicle is going down a cliff, Rukshani, all you do is, instead of, getting a bigger damage, you will crash the vehicle to a nearby tree. So Wijewardana found a similar tree in the form of the International Monetary Fund. He had discussed it with the IMF beforehand, got the IMF to support Sri Lanka in the event that the rupee might fall uncontrollably in the market, and the IMF was behind as a support. So when the rupee was floated on the 23rd of January 2001, the exchange rate, like today, fell from 80 rupees per US dollar to 98 rupees per US dollar within a few hours. But International Monetary Fund issued a statement saying that the floating of the rupee is the correct policy action, and IMF will stand by Sri Lanka. Then the speculators knew that the IMF will not allow Sri Lanka rupee to fall further. They started bringing back the dollars to the market, and within about say 3 weeks time, the rupee started depreciating gradually, and it settled around 88 rupees per US dollar. So that is how it should be done. Now, present floating had been done without any of these preparations. It had been simply done by central bank, not as a plan or by a choice. It had been, actually central bank had been forced to do it because it didn't have any more weapons to shoot. So once you don't have weapons to shoot, all you have to do, Rukshan, is to surrender yourself to your enemy. So this is exactly what the central bank has done.
Understood, sir. So on a different perspective, there's a buzz in the international market, among the international market analysts and economists, where they say that to save the Sri Lankan economy, it is good to establish a currency board. So what will be the impact if we do so? And actually, is it required at the moment?
Well, a currency board is different from the central banking system which we have, Rukshani, because before the establishment of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, we had a currency board. During that period, if you can speak to your grandfather or great-grandfather, he will always tell you the prices were stable and they were very low, and they had a jolly good time during that period. That is because in the case of a currency board, for the board to issue the local currency, it should have 100% backing of foreign exchange reserve with it. For example, suppose we have equated 1 rupee for $1. If you have a currency board today, for the currency board to issue 1 rupee, it must have acquired $1 and kept it as a reserve. That is because there's 100% backing. But when we go to the central banking system, we don't have such a backing, Rukshani. While the currency board is like this Bank of Ceylon building in the fort, you can find it's a tall structure. It doesn't fall to anything. But a central bank is like an inverted pyramid because it grows like this. You have a very small reserve base, but by printing more and more money, you grow sideways. And since the base is very low, at any time the central bank can collapse. Unfortunately for us, we had moved away from the currency board system to central banking, and the result had been that the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, during the entirety of its existence so far, it had not actually kept its independence, at the high level it is needed to repair. So as a result, many politicians had been able to, specifically in the last few years, to get the central bank to print money. And this was also supported by the policy ideology of the Governor W.D. Lakshman, who became the governor in 2019, December 2019, because he believed that if a central bank prints money, that money doesn't affect inflation, nor does it affect the depreciation of the currency. Even the present governor believes the same thing. So as a result, they had freely, printed money, because people are saying, the central bank is now famous for printing money. In fact, people are referring to the notes and coins issued by the central bank, which is actually only one segment of the money created by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka during the last 25-month period. That is, Rukshani, the total money supply in the country, which consists of the rupees and cents issued by the central bank, the demand deposit that you hold in commercial banks, time and savings deposit that you hold in commercial banks, and 50% of the non-resident foreign currency account that you hold with commercial banks, which we call the broad money supply, and central bank has designated it as M2B. This M2B has increased during the last 25-month period by 3 trillion Sri Lanka rupees, or 40%. Now that is the problem. Now central bank has done that without having any backing of a foreign exchange reserve. But if you go to a currency board today, what would happen is that we are actually introducing the much needed discipline to our politicians, the citizens of the country, and also we are giving a good message to people in the rest of the world. I can give you an example, because in 1965, when Singapore was separated from the Union of Malaysia, and it had to make a choice whether to set up a central bank or continue with the currency board system, which it had inherited from the British rulers, colonial masters. Singapore actually continued with the currency board because it thought that its finance minister was Dr. Goh Ken Swee, and he actually made a historic statement saying that by continuing with the currency board system, it is delivering messages to its own future politicians, the citizens of Singapore, and the people in the rest of the world. Its own politicians is, if you want to incur a vote-catching expenditure program, you have to bring that money from your home. not the money printed by a central bank.
Mm.
Citizens is, if you want better public services, you must be prepared to pay for it. The people in the rest of the world is, you leave your savings with us. We will use those savings very prudently and productively and ensure that you will receive a good rate of return, and also we will ensure that you will receive your money back. Now, this is the advantage of a currency board because it introduced discipline. But today, if you are to go to a currency board, Rukshani, now we have issued so much of, total central bank assets amount about, say, 2 trillion. But to back it by, 100% foreign exchange, we don't have that luxury here in Sri Lanka today, because if a country cannot pay a ship that has come to its port with a load of, say, fuel amounting to, say, 35 million US dollars, how can that country, build up a currency board now and fill it up with the necessary foreign exchange reserves? Unless, the Almighty God, who becomes very merciful and very sympathetic to people in Sri Lanka, provide those drops those dollars from the sky. It is not, possible for Sri Lanka to establish a currency board at the at the current moment now. But it's a good thing.
Understood, sir. Understood. So now you mentioned about this also, sir. So the hot topic nowadays in Sri Lanka is trying to obtain a loan from the IMF. So, but let me ask you it like this: even though a third party like the IMF intervenes and then involves in the Sri Lankan economy, will be able to still settle the dollar below a 300 rupee?
Well, Rukshani, IMF is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. Now, we'll have to understand the factor here. We have a financial sector in an economy, we have the real sector in an economy. We are not worried about the financial sector, Rukshani, we are worried about the real sector, because you are worried about the rice that you eat, the coconut that you eat, the clothes that you wear, which are being produced by the real sector in the economy. Now, IMF loan will not help us to promote the real sector, but it will create the necessary macroeconomic conditions inside the country so that Sri Lanka would be able to promote the real sector and attain the final objective of, total wealth and welfare in the country. Because we are talking about this prosperity and splendor. No? The prosperity and splendor is brought to us not by the financial sector, but by the real sector. So IMF is needed, and if you compare today, the alternative is homegrown policies and the IMF policies. Homegrown policy is to get this, this short-term, very short-term financial facilities from friendly central banks in the form of swaps, and meet the day-to-day requirement. IMF is going by providing a longer-term financing, maturing in about, say, 7 to 10 years' time at a cheaper cost. Now, many people do not understand the actual cost which we are paying, we are incurring when we get a soft facility from a member central bank, friendly central bank. Now, for example, suppose this soft facility from Bangladesh, we got, say, 150 million US dollars from Bangladesh, and in a soft facility, what happens is, Rukshani, that the Bangladesh give us dollars, we have to give Bangladesh the equivalent amount in Sri Lanka rupees. So if the Sri Lanka rupee is 200 rupees per US dollar, what we have done is we have given 300 billion Sri Lanka rupees to Bangladesh, and Bangladesh has given us 150 billion US dollars. So Bangladesh will open an account in the name of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka and credit that account with 150 million US dollars. And those US dollars are ours. At the same time, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka will have to open an account in the name of Bangladesh Bank and credit 300 billion Sri Lanka rupees. And those rupees are theirs. Now, those people can invest those rupees in, say, 1 year treasury bills at around, say, 12%. And they can earn an income out of that. And Sri Lanka will use the 150 million US dollars to buy fuel or buy medicine or buy food from other countries, and will exhaust it. So the soft facility requires a basic interest payment to the person who provides the soft facility around say 2%. So 12% earned on the traceable investment plus the 2% that we pay, the Bangladesh will get a benefit of 14% per annum. Whereas Sri Lanka doesn't get anything because Sri Lanka has to use this 150 million US dollars for payment purpose. So we actually we exhaust it immediately. Now, if you go to IMF, the total cost that you have to incur is about 3.5%. And also the repayment is half-yearly repayment in installments. And the maturity period is 7 to 10 years. So as a result, it's not a burden to Sri Lanka's economy. But if you go to a soft facility, every 3-month period, we have to renew it with Bangladesh Bank. And if Bangladesh Bank says, okay, we can't give this facility to you anymore, give us our dollars, Bangladesh can easily give the rupees back to us because they have already invested and earned good money out of it. But to give them the dollars, we have to borrow dollars from some other party because it's a bullet repayment. We call it a bullet repayment, whereas the repayment to IMF is an installment repayment. So as a result, IMF is the better option than this homegrown policies. So this particular factor must be put to the head of the president and the economic council because they don't realize the actual cost that we are incurring by going for the soft facilities. Now, for example, the soft facility with China amounting to 10 billion yuan can be used only for making payments in yuan, and you can't add it to our foreign reserves the way that the central bank has done. So that is why the Chinese ambassador said recently the equivalent of that 10 billion is 1.5 billion. He said that the Chinese government is willing to give Sri Lanka another 1.5 billion loan in order to refinance the soft facility with the People's Bank of China. It's not a new loan. So suppose if China doesn't give us that money, now we have to borrow that money from someone else. Then who is the fellow who is willing to lend us that money? So that is why IMF is the more plausible and the more relevant institution for Sri Lanka to get the money to overcome this temporary balance of payments. And we had gone to IMF in the past. Even a leftist finance minister like Dr. Nampera had tapped the IMF resources for 2 times in 71 and 73. So it's not a bad thing for us to do. So we must go for that. But as I have told you, IMF is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition, because IMF cannot promote the real economy. To promote the real economy, Rukshani, people like us will have to work hard. But today, Ian might tell us, working hard is not enough. We have to work smart. But it's necessary to work smart. That means we have to introduce the information and communication technology to improve the productivity across the economy, so that the productivity of the government sector, productivity in universities, productivity in hospitals, productivity in services sector, banks, industry, in all these places will have to be improved significantly in order to derive the benefit out of the real sector. And that is our job. It's not the job of the IMF, and you can't blame the IMF for that.
Understood. So in summary, we need to have a very good financial discipline, which we don't have at the moment. And we have to look at the dollar rate increment as well. And I understand that this is, we are reaching out for IMF technical support rather than a loan. And also we need to narrow the budget deficit at the moment, as well as we saw in the papers that going to IMF, and then they have requested for a department restructure. I believe that is also one of the things we need to consider, sir. And
I mean, you have very correctly, pointed out the ailments in the macroeconomy by, pointing out the immediate requirement that we have to do. But at the same time, remember, our job is not to have this discipline and the stability in the finance sector, which is actually necessary. We should go after the improvement of the real economy, productivity, and have the highest level of income and prosperity for us. And that is what the nation aspires. For that purpose, along with the movement to IMF, not just getting the technical assistance to improve the systems in Sri Lanka, he should get the IMF financial facility, as the government has to make that announcement immediately. The Minister of Finance will have to say, and the governor of the Central Bank will have to say jointly, we are going to IMF and we are going to seek this loan. Not that the way that the Minister of Finance has said, okay, I will discuss with the IMF people when I go to Washington to attend the spring meetings in late April. That won't help. It won't, put the confidence into the heads of the people who are willing to supply dollars to Sri Lanka. So because of this reason, going to IMF should be accompanied by a nationwide economic reform program aiming at improving the productivity, easing the business, doing business in Sri Lanka, expanding Sri Lanka's export sector gradually from the current low-tech based exports to high-tech based exports, and eventual joining of the fourth industrial revolution. Those must be the goals of Sri Lanka, and those must be the top priorities of the present Gotabaya Rajapaksa administration in Sri Lanka.
Understood. So looking all of that as the goals of Sri Lanka, do you think Sri Lanka will be declared bankruptcy?
Well, as it is, I think we are now a bankrupt nation, because you'll be noticing the signs. I mean, now we have to, if a country, if somebody has to get the creditors to defer the repayment of debt, and also has to agree with the conditions which the creditor might impose on us. If it is a business enterprise, Rukshani, that business enterprise is a bankrupt business enterprise. Now, Sri Lanka had to pay some $515 million in January, which it had owed to the Asian Clearing Union. And what Sri Lanka did was, Sri Lanka got India to defer it by 2 months. Then there was another $400 million that had been due to ACU out of the transaction that had arisen between January and today. So already 900 million. Sri Lanka had to get that also deferred by another 2 months, because Sri Lanka doesn't have enough foreign exchange to make those payments. Then you could have noted that the economic advisors who had been appointed to advise the National Economic Council, they had come up with 5-fold policy recommendations, and one of the policy recommendations to set up immediately a committee consisting of Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance officers to look at the foreign exchange problem and provide suggestions, and then hire a financial advisor and a legal advisor to help government of Sri Lanka to restructure its loans, which means that there is a bond, in terms of sovereign bond, which is to mature in July this year, amounting to $1,000 million, and there is a high speculation in the market that Sri Lanka will be forced to default that. Some signs of that speculation are visible, Rukshan, if you look at the current market price of this sovereign bond, which is to mature in July this year. Normally, when a sovereign bond reaches its maturity date, the market price becomes, closer to the face value. But in the present case, the market price of this particular sovereign bond is about $67 per $100 bond. Because it is traded at a very deep discount, nobody wants to buy it. And the rate of return of the particular sovereign bond has increased to 223%. And that's the highest paid sovereign bond in the international market today. Now, all these signs show, Rukshani, that even though we don't like to admit it, we have become a bankrupt nation externally, because we have to now get even $1 or $2, it doesn't matter, from anybody who is willing to give us. It's just like a beggar's world. We are in the beggar's world, not in the donor's world.
Right. Thank you very much, sir, for your insights and your descriptions and the information you've given us. I think you've left us thinking about what we can do next. I'm not going to ask you that question. That is for the next session. So I'll keep it there and remind everyone to join us for the next session. But I would like to thank you for your time and your insights today. And as always, you're leading us on how to do things and how the economy is changing. And we really love your constructive criticism, which will be really helpful for all the aspects as well. So I would also like to thank our MBA MESI coordinator, Professor Arunashanta Gamage, who is also a patron of the Japura Alumni Association. And also I would like to thank the CEO, Sanjay Alvitigala of Elearning.lk for powering up this session, and all the JMAA executive committee members and all the membership as well. And I would also like to thank all the viewers today who have, without all of you, this session wouldn't have been a success. And we also request you to send us any suggestions you have in any discussions you would like to see in our future webinar series, so that we will be able to explain how the situation is and how we can overcome these situations as individuals as well. And also, sorry, a little bit of water is required now. And also I would like to mention about the next session we are going to have, and it will be about how we can survive in the current situation. So I would like to tell everyone to join us for our next session as well, and we will tell you about the date as soon as possible. So let's keep helping the nation and being innovative, just like Dr. Wijewardana mentioned. Look beyond the lines so that we'll be able to use our knowledge, our practical knowledge, to enhance the productivity through the information technology like the other countries do. So thank you very much once again, and we are happy to have all of you here, and have a nice day. Stay safe.